Friends, thank you so much for staying. We're about to have a conversation that is extraordinarily important. Sitting on the stage with me are 5 extraordinary people who represent indigenous communities, both from the island nations, Tonga and Palau, and from the Arctic and the far north. This planet used to be 100% under the stewardship and guardianship of indigenous peoples. That in fact, every single person here, if you go back to your deep roots of where you've come from, is based from you have in each of you a chip, a microchip, that it will remember where your stock originally came from. Most of us have lost that memory. Most of us don't have in our present state of existence that deep connection to the earth that indigenous peoples who still have that chip pulsing loudly and embodying their entire relationship to family, to enterprise, to culture, to their place, all linked together. My friends at Conservation International, an organization I started many years ago and have stepped down as the CEO about 2 years ago, are here and share this concern of how do you link that security of this earth with the respect for culture. And I feel that very strongly, and was inspired as I left my original organization to with some friends start an organization called Nia Tero. Nia Tero means our earth in a language of Esperanto. And our earth, our purpose at Nia Tero is our sole purpose, our universe of focus is on indigenous peoples to support their efforts to secure culture and their place, their territory. And the reason, of course, is twofold. One is social justice. One is recognizing that these communities have been under siege, and that is the social justice component. The other is a little more selfish, and it's that these communities of people have a deep knowledge of how this earth ticks. They understand that we belong to the planet. We do not have ownership of her. And it's to learn and to learn from them and to support them as they secure their wisdom, as they share their wisdom, and as they manage their territories in a way that allows all of us to thrive and to survive. So that's the mission and the purpose of Nia Tero, to be supportive of indigenous peoples in securing their culture and their territories. So the purpose of this discussion this afternoon is to hear from these extraordinary people, basically to begin an exploration, to continue an exploration that we started last year. And that is an exploration of what are the conditions upon which they live, what's the knowledge they have, and what's the pathway forward that will allow them to secure their place and also allow us to learn from them more effectively. So the way we're going to structure this is that each of our guests, the panelists, are going to take a few minutes, let's say 3 minutes, to talk a bit about where they come from and the challenges and the roles, the opportunities that they play in terms of their territories and the challenges that they face. And then we'll ask a series of questions that can dig a little deeper into the reality that indigenous peoples must deal with as they address self-governance, as they address sovereignty issues, as they deal with the impositions that are placed upon them. The way I'm going to start, I would like to start with Aili Keskitalo, who is the president of the Sami Parliament, and then after Ali speaks, then I'm going to go and ask Kupik Kleist, who's a Greenlandic commissioner and the former Premier of Greenland to speak, and then I will ask Tuku Minyak Olsen, who is a grad student and a member of the Inuit Circumpolar Council, to speak. And after that, I would like to dig into the Pacific Islands. And Cecilio Eldebash, who's the Chief of Staff of the Office of the President of Palau, you could not be further away from the Inuit people than Palau. We'll talk, because that's the issue. Our planet is actually, the people of this earth, indigenous peoples, have deep wisdom across this entire planet. And then I'm going to ask Dr. Salome Tafo, who's from Tonga, and you heard from briefly before, and from the University of South Pacific, to give a perspective from Tonga. Ali, could you begin, please? Thank you.
Ologito, thank you, Peter. First, I think I will have to explain that the Sami people is the indigenous people of Northern Europe. We live in 4 different national states: Norway, Sweden, Finland, and Russia. And of course, that situation gives us special challenges into the dynamic between us as one distinct people and the Sami policies or development policies of 4 different states. It's really complex. I live on the Norwegian side of the border, so I will focus on the situation in Norway. But we do have cross-border issues. And I would like to use one of these issues as an illustration. I'd like to speak about the paradox of green colonialism. When colonialism has dressed up in nice green finery, and we are told that we have to give up our territories and our livelihoods to save the world because of climate change. Currently, the state of Finland is planning to build an Arctic railway over to the Norwegian side of the border, which will pass through most of the reindeer herding districts on the Finnish side of the border and 2 Norwegian reindeer herding districts. And this is celebrated because railway is supposed to be environmentally friendly, but it is a major industrial development into our food-producing areas that will have consequences for our ability to continue with our traditional reindeer herding livelihood. We have other examples as well. We are told that we have to allow mining, mineral extraction in reindeer herding territories because the world needs our minerals, again, to have a green change, to have a shift in technology, again, to save the world. And we are told that we have to have wind power plants. They even call them wind parks, but they are really industrial power plants in our reindeer herding areas because the world needs clean energy. So as an indigenous people, we do not only carry the burden of climate change, but we also carry the burden of mitigation or the world's reaction to climate change, and it's a pretty heavy burden.
Thank you, Peter. And before I respond to that, I just want to say it's quite a privilege for me to be here as part of this panel and to share our Pacific experience, more particularly my home country of Palau. Of course, in response to the questions related to indigenous guardianship and self-governance, ecosystems, and thriving communities. And I'm also privileged to be joined by our friends from the Arctic area who have shared their view of indigenous situation in their respective countries. And I'm quite happy to be part of this exchange. as we continue. Palau, like most Pacific Island, is very much an indigenous nation. Of course, we have gone through colonizations, first by the Germans and then the Japanese, and of course the United States, before we formally gained our sovereignty in 1984. So we're quite a young nation, island nation. So although we have gone through this different period of colonization, our population is really made up of, a great majority of our population is made up of indigenous people. So most of our geopolitical and social development decision that has been made over the years has been very much driven by the indigenous population. For instance, our constitution, when we first created our constitution, it recognized the need for the government to maintain, to some extent, the important role of traditional leaders, especially in the area of management for land and ocean resources. And we think that's very important, and also a unique aspect of our governance structure that we feel it's been working over time, at least without much of a conflict with our existing democratic form of governance. The traditional concept of preserving resources, I give you as an example, and we call this concept bul in our language, is a good example of integrating traditional process of initiating a fishing moratorium with the process of designating 80% of our ocean space as a marine protected area, which is eventually became Palau National Marine Sanctuary. It's quite a big undertaking to designate 80% of your own water, your own EEZ. And because of the support we got from the indigenous people, the support we got from our international partners, the conservation societies and NGOs, we were able to overcome all the obstacles of getting this 80% of our water designated. So I think that's a success story for Palau, being able to work very closely with our indigenous community and of course with our elected leaders to come up with these kind of big decisions.
Okay, thank you. And thank you very much for providing the stage for discussing issues which are very dear to our hearts. I'm an Inuk from Greenland, but also I belong to the Inuit people of the Arctic. Like the Samis, we are divided into 4 different states. But the important thing to understand is that almost all indigenous peoples were one people before colonization started. And those lines on the maps, drawing the borders between the countries, actually always divide indigenous peoples into different states. The peoples existed long before the states came along. And that is a simple fact that what most of us are trying to do nowadays is to reconnect, reunite with our own peoples, with our own families, cross-border, and trying to better our, what in UN terms is called self-determination. I myself, I became the premier of my country just 2 weeks prior to introducing what we call self-government of Greenland, which is a new deal between the state of Denmark and the former colony Greenland. At that time we had 30 years of home rule, and then we transfer it into a self-governance model. What is important about the self-governance agreement is that basically the Greenland people, when they decide, if they decide, by a public referendum, can secede from the Danish state. We can be independent the day we want to be independent by a simple public vote. But I would say between today and the one fine future day where Greenland will become independent, there is a long, long way. To sum it up, I think it's fair to say that our challenges and the huge problems that we are facing are those of colonialism. What we've been left with, even though we had 30 years of home rule, is high degree of abuse of every kind, very, very low degree of education, poor infrastructure, a huge and urgent need for investments of all kinds, and to build up our societal institutions. So, on paper, you could say we are some way ahead of the Samis, but in reality, I think we are all facing the same issues. And Aili just said to me before we entered the stage that our luck is being an island, because then we are geographically isolated from the colonial states. And you are from islands as well. I would probably challenge the question of if it's some kind of or if it's better to live on an island than on a mainland. Maybe we can discuss that. But basically, being one people in the Arctic under 4 states, we are at very different levels of self-governance. Some are still like Greenland was 50 years ago, and in some areas they're way ahead. So what I would call the freedom movements in the Arctic of indigenous peoples are very, very different from country to country.
Thank you.
You know, in the Pacific, many people would think that it's just a one culture, but that's not the case. Our region is divided up into 3 main groups. So we have the Polynesian, we have the Micronesian, and the Melanesian. And as my colleague here has mentioned, most of these Pacific Island countries has been colonized by various foreign powers, such as the US, the Japanese, the Germans, except for Tonga. That is one country that was never colonized by any of these foreign powers. And it could be because we don't even have a resource there. They probably came and see that there's nothing there to get, so they left it alone.
How lucky.
We are very resilient people, I have to say, because despite these colonizations by these foreign powers, we still, our culture still remain intact. And I can say that with confidence in all across the Pacific Island countries. However, where I see the challenge, it comes from our ocean. That's where I see the challenge to our culture is. Some of the small island countries, the atolls, such as Kiribati, we have Tuvalu, they're being threatened by sea level rise. And with that, if you think about relocation, you think about the issues of land, rights. Those are challenges that these people will have to face. They're facing losing their culture, their sense of culture as well. And then we are also threatened by developments. You know, we're trying to adapt to different forms of governance, democratic governance. Perhaps maybe it's something that we're still trying to get used to, so that also presents some threats to us. But like I said, the ocean, that's where our greatest threat, in my opinion, that's where I see this threat comes in. And one of the most recent one is similar to these Arctic nations is the exploring minerals. That could be something that could present some threats in terms of security and also in terms of our culture. But our culture is, our ocean is where we see the greatest threat to the region.
How large is your ocean territory for Tonga?
Oh dear. It's much larger than its land size, that's for sure.
Yeah.
First of all, I would like to say that I believe that the best thing that can happen for communities is to gain self-rule, or more self-rule, in order to be more thriving. I say this because I gained more and more evidence with my education that is the right way. For instance, Harvard project in the Department of American Indian Economic Development says that the best thing that can happen for the natives is that they are given more responsibility in their own territories. Through this, they can themselves make decisions for their own future, because more responsibility means that they themselves create their development, and that means better success, better sustainability, and this creates a link between decision and the consequences, meaning better results for the people. Getting more responsibility also means that we should be better at delegating power. More responsibility means better political freedom, meaning that we can create development in our own hands for the better. And in Alaska, for example, there is many different management units in almost every boroughs that are more adapted to their own needs. I think that we could learn from that all municipalities do not have to have exactly square structure. We might start looking what they can and delegate some power to them. And I think this study appeals very much for Arctic as well and Greenland as well, because that is important that we get things done in our own way. What other countries do, we can't just copy-paste and use here in our countries. I think that's why we have so many challenges with get the things done with success. Problems are just being band-aid, saluted without working on the roots, which are in fact those we need to work on. And with saying that, I do not mean that everything should become Greenlandic or that we should only do this in our own way, because we have to have both legs in both worlds, our own and the globalized world. We just have to find the balance and find ourselves in this more for efficient institution. And we have earlier been looking south when trying to find better practices for getting a better system. But I think we also should start looking for east and west to other Arctic nations to find better suitable systems for the Arctic, because together we are stronger, and that's how we can get win-win situation, because win-lose situation is lose-lose situation for everyone. So we all have to find a cohesion for this. And yeah, Rojana.
All of humanity is in a crisis. And there are multiple crises, but a biggest one right now, urgent, as we see from the Intergovernmental Panel discussion on climate change, is the impending disaster from climate. And if there are cultures that actually can be the leaders in terms of resilience, in terms of the strength. You represent people that are resilient, are strong, have survived enormous threats from many, many different forces. And much of that has come from your connection to your place, your understanding of this place. You don't look at minerals in a way that a mining company looks at minerals. You look at the whole of the organism. It's a understanding of how this place, your place, has to be thrive, whether it's the ocean or it's the ice. And so I wonder if you could talk for a few minutes, each of you can think a little bit and talk about what the rest of the world can learn from you. And Aile, you started talking about the threat posed to food security. Could you just talk a little bit about if we were wise enough to listen, what could we learn?
Well, I think what is a core element of Sami culture is embedded in the word Birigiumi.
Can you say that word again?
Birigen.
Birigen.
Yes, which means that you should only take what you need, and you should not consume more than what you need, and you should only be able to get by. And that is a core Sami value, and I think we share that with many other indigenous cultures of the world, that you should not extract everything that you could extract from the nature. Something should stay put for future generations. But I would also like to say that I think it is a need also for us as indigenous cultures to reconnect with those values. I guess that has been values also for other nations of the world. We should all reconnect to those kind of values that do not always represent the overuse or the overconsumption of the environment that surrounds us.
Thank you. Other thoughts? Kupik.
Yeah, talking about climate change it's always been kind of a little bit peculiar for us. We knew that the environment and the climate was changing long before the rest of the globe learned about it. And then the big debates then turned over to be, is it man-made or is it just the nature of the globe that it's changing that way? Rather than adapting to the new situations, the world engaged in a huge debate and accusing each other for this and that, while at the same time we could look out our windows and watch it happening. The US president the other day announced that he now believes that the environment is changing, but it will then switch back by itself probably in 1 million years. That's maybe good, I don't know. But the fact is that we are living in the midst of the climate change and its consequences. Indigenous peoples worldwide are also characterized by living of nature, with nature, in the nature. So we are highly, highly dependent on it, or we are impacted seriously by the climate change. And I don't think that you would find one single individual living, for instance, in the Arctic questioning whether the climate is changing. That's absolute rubbish to us. And also, I would like to state that there is absolute no contradiction between exploiting the living resources and at the same time protecting the environment and the wildlife. If you are dependent on harvesting the wildlife, your foremost and most important interest is, of course, to protect it. Otherwise, you will cut over the tree that you are sitting on. So that is also absolute rubbish, but by the worldwide environmental movements and animal protection movements, we are accused for exploiting the nature. You are forbidding us hunting whales and seals, and it's, you pity the polar bears. But what we are talking about is the people. That's our focus, the people and the well-being of in this case, of the Arctic peoples. And there is absolutely no doubt from my own experience and my travels across of the Arctic that most of the people in the Arctic area are facing living conditions which is below acceptable level. And that's even though we are living in states, we are citizens of states which are regarded being the richest ones on the earth. So that's a huge kind of contradiction, that at the same time we are looking at, I said this morning in a panel that now we are aiming at going to Mars. We have been on the moon, but now we are reaching further. But establishing proper communication in some of the remote villages in the Arctic seems almost impossible.
Yeah.
But we can go to Mars.
Yeah. Krupik, thank you. I'm not sure if I actually want to go to Mars, so I'm going to pass on that. I want to get to the island just quickly, because I can see that we've got some time shortage. Could you respond? I mean, you made a commitment in Palau to secure 80% of your EEZ as a marine protected area and 20% for sustainable fishing. Why?
Okay, first of all,
thank you. And secondly, why? And what are the lessons that you can teach?
I think we have been fortunate to have a leader who like to call himself the champion of conservation. He's the person who is very passionate about his leadership style of preserving and so he's always have a theme in his political campaign saying that we will preserve the best and improve the rest. And that has been a big part of his campaign to the Palauan people that, we need, being a small community, being a small country, we have very limited resources that if we don't take bold steps to preserve them, our children and our grandchildren will not be able to enjoy the same resources that we are enjoying today. So that has been the big driver of our conservation effort. And he had been very good in persuading his people to believe in the concept of conservation. Our big challenge is we have so many different countries, different powers that want to be partner with Palau and to be sharing the resources that we have. So we're allowing for that. But we feel that, if we're going to make some effort to do conservation, you need to take a very big, bold step. So 80% is something that we feel will show a good result, rather than just going with a piecemeal a portion of your conservation efforts. So
just think if the rest of the world adopted anything close to that, how healthy this planet would be, and how more vibrant and how lifted we would be if we could actually embrace. It doesn't have to be 80%, but 50% would be a nice number, or what? I'm not sure what the right number is, but we could do things differently, right?
Right. And And like my colleague here said, you can only, if you adopt a policy that's allow you to only get what you need, then you can be sure that your resources can last a long, long time for your future generations, and that's what we believe from our own perspective of conservation.
Tuka, could you just, I'm not sure what these numbers mean, they're flashing in front of me, but will someone just pull us off the stage and we have to leave? Tuka, you talked earlier about the opportunity, the responsibilities for self-governance. Could you comment on, from your perspective, as a young leader who has kind of been observing where societies are going, for your people, for the Inuit, what has to change, and how much time do we have? How much patience do you have?
Hard question. I think one of our best qualities, Inuit and indigenous peoples, like agreeing with Aile, is also that we are very close to the nature, living very close to the nature. And when I was living in Germany, I could see that lots of children never have slept under the stars and never seen a fireplace. And I think that is our quality, one of our best qualities, that we are so close to the nature and we know how to take care of it. And I think people who are living in big cities are too far away from the nature. So so we need to reconnect with the nature in order to understand how we can truly protect it. So yeah, please, whenever you can, please go to nature. And if you have free time tomorrow or Monday, maybe go and see the volcanoes or something.
Thank you. So I just got the hook. We have to get off the stage, but I think before we leave, the one thought I would ask us all to kind of remember is that when I have spoken with Inuit people, when I've been with the Dene people in the Northwest Territories, I've always asked them one question. Remember, this is very far north, and the question is, are you afraid of snakes? The answer is always yes. The second question is, have you ever seen a snake? The answer is always no. The third question is, are there any snakes in your country? The answer is, there never have been. So you wonder, why is there a fear of snakes? It's because inside of us, we have a chip that's still alive that reminds us about where we came from. And that's the chip that we have to awaken, and we have to make certain that our leaders understand that if we don't reawaken that chip, we are actually lost. Thank you all very much for being with us.